Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow is my 18th birthday, and I'll be moving out and going no contact with my family. Tomorrow, I finally become an adult, at least by US law, and I will be moving into my girlfriend's uncle's guest house for the remainder of my senior year of high school before college. My hope is to never talk to my family again. Why, you ask? The catalyst for this move really starts at my conception. My bio dad left my mom the minute she found out she was pregnant. She had me and was immediately a single mom. She met Ted, and they moved in when I was 2. He also had a son, Mark, who was 2. This is where the second problem emerges. While Mark's bio mom died, mine was still alive. So, my mom adopted Mark almost immediately after marriage, but Ted never adopted me. They decided to force my bio dad to pay child support. They also had my half-sister a year later. So, everyone in the family has Ted's last name, except me. I have my mother's maiden name. You'll notice I call my mom's husband Ted instead of Dad. That wasn't always the case. I called him Dad for almost my entire life because he was the only father figure I ever knew. But there were always small issues that made him different from a normal dad. When we were at family events, my mom would refer to both Mark and me as her sons, but Ted always corrected and said I was his adopted son, while Mark was his real son. Mark and my half-sister, Grace, would get special one-on-one time with Ted, but I never did. This got significantly worse as school progressed. I don't know how to say this without coming across as an ass, but I'm just significantly smarter than Mark. It's just a fact. While he struggles to get BS in classes, I got A's in honors and AP classes, honestly with very little effort. School was easy for me, and it showed in my report card. When this became noticeable in middle school, it began to eat at Ted. I was a little young to notice it, but looking back, it's so obvious. When report cards came out, Ted would shower Mark and Grace with praise, but mine was always met with jokes about how I could sleep through class and still get an A. Every compliment from Ted was always couched in a joke. At one point, Ted wanted to limit how much money they gave me for A's versus Mark, but Mom put a stop to it. However, she never put a stop to Ted and Mark's one-on-one time, which always led to a larger purchase than I received in report card money. As we got older, Ted spent a lot of time bonding with Mark and Grace and little to none with me. My mom never did this with me, or, in fairness, with any of the kids. She always liked hanging out with us all together as a family. When I was 15, and Mark and Ted were going on a camping trip, I was fully aware that I was treated differently and kind of wanted an explanation. So, I had been prodding to join. Finally, on the day of the trip, I kind of blew up and told him it was unfair that I couldn't join. Ted took me aside and said that, while he loved me, it was different. He needed to bond with his real children separately from the family, and that I should try to get my mom to do bonding experiences with just her and me. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but this conversation broke me. After they left, I talked to my mom about it, and this somehow got worse. My mom knew and acknowledged that he acted this way, and said she always ensured I was treated fairly when it came to money. She said he was most of the way to a father figure, and I needed to figure out how to deal with it and be thankful for what he did for me. I was shattered. When Ted returned, I stopped referring to him as Dad. In my family's eyes, this is where the problem started. For me, this was the culmination of their actions, but for the family, I was ungrateful. My mom begged me to look at the bigger picture, but I refused. For the next 4-ish months, I referred to him as Ted. Then, around Christmas, I was 16 at this point. I got home from work, and the entire family was seated in the living room waiting for me. It was really weird. They called it an intervention, and they all discussed how calling Ted by his first name hurt the family. Ted started, talking about how it pained him and how he had always tried to be a good father figure to me. My mom talked about all he had done for me. Mark discussed how ungrateful I was and how angry he was at me. Grace cried and said she wanted her family back and how I was destroying the family. This hurt. I loved Grace, and while she was a daddy's girl, she always acknowledged that Ted treated me differently. If I lost Grace, I lost everyone. I asked if I could speak, and they said yes. And I discussed how he treated me differently, how I was the only one with a different last name, and how I felt like an outsider. I started to cry, and no one came to comfort me. Ted had the audacity to say, "See, this change is killing you inside. You don't have to be an outsider. Rejoin the family." Even my mom and Grace nodded in agreement. I couldn't believe it. It didn't happen that day, but slowly I started calling him Dad again, just to keep the peace, but it never felt right, and I never forgave them. I had a lot of suicidal feelings. I spent months just dreaming of ending it. One day at work I was discussing how shitty Ted was, and a co-worker, Jenny, suggested I start saving to move out. She said once you turn 18 you could get a place on your own. It was a great idea, and started working and saving, preparing for what I finally get to do tomorrow. Jenny and I started dating, and an apartment eventually turned into her uncle's guest house. He had been looking for a new tenant, and I was able to give him 10 months' rent up front. That gets me through the school year to college. I've slowly been moving out without anyone noticing. Tomorrow, while they are all at church, I'm going to grab my bed and the final items that I'm taking. I will also be leaving a note for my mom, telling her I hope I can forgive her in time, but right now my anger toward her is at a boiling point. I know that leaving will end all financial support, but honestly, if Jenny hadn't suggested moving out, I'm not sure I would have made it. I was starting to get very specific in my plan to end it. I don't know if she's the one, or if we'll even date past high school. She's staying local for college, and I need to leave. But I couldn't have done this without her, and I'll always love her for her help and encouragement. I'll try and update with how I'm doing after the move is finalized. Wish me luck. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Brother-in-law spilled the beans on a family secret that will probably destroy my marriage. My wife, Kelly, and her brother Mark have had a strained relationship for as long as I have been with her. I first learned of it from Kelly, whose explanation was that Mark was the youngest and the spoiled baby. Something about that answer just didn't ring true to me. Eventually, I had a chance to ask her parents where this animosity came from. They didn't have an exact answer, but said Kelly and Mark had been at odds since they were small children. Their hostility boiled over 6 months after Kelly and I started dating. It was the wedding of one of Kelly and Mark's cousins, and it was my first real occasion to spend an extended time around her family. Kelly's mom, Sarah, and dad, Lucas, had treated me special from the first time I met them, a few weeks after she and I started dating. I admit it was quite a change from how the parents of my 2 previous girlfriends acted. Both of those fathers looked at me with a level of suspicion that I felt was not only unwarranted but unhinged. In fact, the families of both of those previous girlfriends were always cold towards me. And, in truth, I'm certain their attitude rubbed off on those girlfriends to the point it doomed the relationships. But Sarah and Lucas acted as if I was one of the family, especially at the cousin's wedding, when Lucas paraded me around to his friends like some prize-winning bull. Even Mark was friendly to me, despite the friction between him and Kelly. However, Mark would drop occasional hints when we talked that his family wasn't as well adjusted as it appeared. Never pushed the subject further. My own family overflowed with passive-aggressive feuds, near-slanderous speculation, and long periods of not speaking. I figured family dysfunction was all relative when others viewed it from the outside. The cousin's wedding started well enough, with Kelly serving as one of the bridesmaids and Mark as one of the groomsmen. Speaking from personal experience, the wedding was one of those ostentatious shindigs that I felt wasn't realistic, since the engaged couple were both 19 years old. Having spoken with them a few times, they seemed deeply in love, but several of my college buddies, having married at that age or a little later, were already divorced and bitter. The ceremony went without a hitch. The bride was beautiful, and the groom looked as cool as James Bond in his tux. It was at the reception dinner where the Kelly and Mark fiasco happened. I was dancing with Kelly's mom as the band played some Sinatra tune, the lead singer belting it out with all the style of Frank. In fact, between Sarah and Lucas and a few other relatives demanding time, I hadn't had a chance to say 3 words to Kelly since immediately after the ceremony. That's when I noticed Kelly and Mark off in the corner. I couldn't hear anything, but their angry facial expressions and gestures suggested they were in a heated argument. Having heard about their squabbles, I didn't want to interfere. But when Kelly looked over in my direction with a worried face, I quickly excused myself and rushed over. "Hey babe," I said, moving in beside Kelly. "I'd really like to get you on the dance floor." I figured the best approach was to try and separate the two. Mark looked at me like he was about to say something, but thought better of it. "Todd, you're too good for my sister," he said, walking away with a strange smile. Kelly grabbed my hand and pulled me to the dance floor without saying a word. Yeah, I didn't have to be a genius-level psychologist to know there was something more than a simple strained sibling relationship. As Kelly and I started dancing, I was about to ask what the problem was when she pulled me in close for a kiss. Even though I was not some naive teenager when it came to the idea of love, that kiss disarmed me to the point I forgot about the incident. Fast forward about 4 years. Kelly and I are married and have settled into what was nearly one of those happily ever after scenarios. At a greatly reduced price, her folks sold us the house Kelly's grandparents had lived in. Doing better than okay with money and being young and adventurous, we were traveling as much as our jobs would allow. Having a few kids was in the plan, but we both wanted to enjoy each other before little rugrats and crumb snatchers took all our time and energy. That year's Thanksgiving was at Sarah and Lucas' house, and given the number of people who were supposed to attend, it would be pushing the limits of organization and patience. Their house already had a gigantic dining room that connected directly into the living room. So, after moving some of the furniture and adding another table, the crowd of about 15-odd people was able to be seated. As was tradition for Kelly's family, we ate around 2 o'clock, and at that moment, everyone was in a great mood. Even Kelly and Mark, who, over the past few years, I had observed in a number of ongoing arguments. Some were kind of extreme, but Mark was always respectful to Kelly and made a point of asking me if we were still good. What bothered me the most was seeing my wife being petty and vindictive, especially when their fights were over minor issues. Kelly never pulled the same cruel behavior on me. In fact, she went to great extremes to reassure me that what went on between her and Mark had nothing to do with me. As we settled in at the dining room table, Kelly and I were seated next to each other, while by chance, Mark and his new girlfriend were across from us. The damn turkey hadn't even received its first cut when things went to shit. "Miranda," Kelly said, passing the mashed potatoes to me, "it's so good to finally meet you. I've heard such good things about you from my mom and aunts. Maybe you're the one who can straighten out Mark and make him an honest man." Oh shit, I thought to myself. While the comment itself wouldn't normally be that provocative in a normal sibling relationship, because Kelly and Mark were involved, I braced for the worst. I sincerely had no idea how bad it would get, and that family secrets would be blasted out like a huge load of shit flying into a high-speed fan. Miranda, a really nice girl who seemed to adore Mark, just smiled. "Well," she said, grabbing Mark's arm and pulling him close, "we were going to spring the news later, but I can't wait any longer. We're engaged." It was then that Miranda showed off the ring she had been wearing around her neck on a small silver jewelry chain. The crowd erupted into cheers, with Sarah and Lucas beaming with pride. It was then that I glanced at my wife. who looked like she had just swallowed something rotten. It took a moment or two for the jubilation to subside, with Kelly never changing her sour expression. "Tell me, Miranda," Kelly said, "has my brother told you about his past? He had quite the record of loving and leaving every woman he's been with. In fact, just a few years ago, he got one girl pregnant and talked her into getting an abortion. Whatever happiness had existed moments before was immediately sucked away, leaving a weird vacuum of what I felt to be foreboding." Everyone at the table was completely silent and looking at either Kelly or Mark. A line had been crossed this time, and no one had any idea how the next few moments would transpire. Mark smiled savagely, kind of like a wolf might after cornering a fat rabbit it had been chasing. I honestly felt a chill down my spine. "Yes, dear sister," Mark said. "I've told Miranda all about my history. Everything, a full accounting of my past relationships, including the time I got Tina pregnant. There are no secrets between me and this woman I'm going to marry." "Here's the question for you, Kelly. Have you told Todd all about your dark past when it came to men?" Yes, early into my relationship with Kelly, we did have a long talk about who we had been with in the past, and I didn't have any problem with her past, as she didn't with mine. Neither of us were young virgin teenagers. Both of us had been around the block a few times. So, when I looked over at my wife, I was expecting to see a similar smile of certainty, that everything about our pasts was out in the open. What I saw on my wife's face was fear. Mark had punched a sore point Kelly obviously didn't want me to know about. "It's okay, babe," I said, looking at her. "I love you, and I'm not worried about what you did in the past. You'd have to be married to understand." But when I placed my hand on Kelly's to reassure her, I knew she had been about to jump up and run out of the room. "Here's the thing, Todd," Mark began. "Kelly's been with a lot of guys." That's when the family started protesting, saying it wasn't the time or place to discuss such matters. I glanced over at Kelly's dad, who warned Mark. It was the only time I had ever seen an angry expression on his face. "Come on, Mark," I said, still foolishly hoping to defuse the situation. "Kelly and I aren't teenagers, and in all honesty, I've got a history myself. Todd, I like you, and you've been great to my sister, but you need to know the truth," Mark said, motioning for everyone else to shut up. Everyone fell silent, the tension so thick that the knife meant for the turkey wouldn't have scratched it. "Todd, my sister has been with well over 100 guys." "Mark, come on, man," I said. "I know you and Kelly have issues, but let's keep things civil. I'm asking you as a friend to stop this shit right now." "Todd, I know you think I'm lying to piss off my sister, but it's true. My dear sister was a full-fledged slut during college." "How do I know this?" "Because she was expelled after getting caught fucking a house full of frat boys. See, somewhere along the way, she caught an STD, and, well, they had to track down all the guys she had contact with." I was speechless and getting ready to launch myself across the table and beat the shit out of my brother-in-law. But I looked over at Kelly first and saw the expression on her face. She was holding back tears, and the expression of shame on her face told me it was true. Yes, it bothered the shit out of me. But I loved my wife and her past, which, while disturbing, suggested a huge flaw in judgment. I completely believed she was a different woman now. "You knew what, Mark?" "Fuck it," I said, standing up, getting ready to defend my wife. "I don't care. Kelly has been a fantastic wife and has never done anything at all to threaten our marriage." "You sure?" Mark said. "You remember my cousin's wedding?" "Shut the fuck up, Mark," Kelly yelled. "You've done enough damage for today. I'm ashamed of how I acted back in college. I wasn't coerced nor drunk, but I was ungodly stupid, and I'll never live down those past actions." "Oh, I touched a nerve," Mark said, smiling. Miranda got up and was doing her best to pull him away from the table. "Listen, Todd," he said. You remember the best man? A guy named Robert? I caught Kelly and him sneaking out of one of the unused dressing rooms at the church. Their clothes were a mess, and when they saw me and my buddy Mac, they both panicked. I know you're going to hate my guts from now on, but you deserve to know. I looked down at Kelly, expecting to see defiance or anger on her face. All I saw was more shame. Is it true? I asked, suddenly numb. Yes, she whispered, looking away from me. This is when I had the absolutely crazy idea. The reason Kelly's parents and other relatives made such an effort to make me feel comfortable and welcome was that, in their view, they were trying to get me to buy damaged goods. I looked around the table, and while the idea was inhumanly ridiculous, all I saw on their faces was shame, like they were all a bunch of toddlers that got caught torturing a cat. I was overwhelmed with the urge to get away from all of them. Todd, please, Kelly said, trying to grab my hand, but I was out the door before anyone could stop me. Driving away seconds later, it felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Hours went by with me driving around until I finally realized I needed to go home and pack a bag, because there was no way in hell I could stay at the house with Kelly. The obvious choice for a refuge was my uncle's guest house. It sat a mile down the road from the main house, and you had to know it even existed to find it. I could crash there as long as I needed, which I thought might be measured in months.